as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. He threatened my paycheck in front of everyone, but ended up losing his job, reputation, and freedom. He thought I was replaceable. Turns out he was the one replaced by the police. They laughed when because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, resigned. They begged when I returned, and I got his salary too. "You are nothing at all, Mary." The recently fired manager laughed and said, "I'm taking your pay, my salary, yes." That is what I'm expressing. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost ought to collect the unemployed workers' salaries that makes it more meaningful. I have to provide for my wife and kids. I can put up with his losing his mind at work. But not getting paid is another matter. Together like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried since I graduated, I have been employed by this company, and I have had nothing but kindness from the president. I wanted to stay. Highs and work. But I can't put up with a boss that is so controlling that every glance was a verdict, and I always lost. He is threatening to withhold my pay. If so, I'm quitting. I'm grateful for everything you've done so far. Oh, so you're giving up. We saved an income. We would have given you so, that's ideal. The staff members who I had smiled too long through invisible pain were seeing the conversation between Manager Mary and myself. Were agitated. They must have concerned what my departure would mean for the project. Nevertheless, Manager Mary mentioned something improper for a manager, not knowing my position. I could no longer, in that moment I felt both invisible and exposed, remain at this company in order to safeguard my family. I'm Will Miller, and I'm 43, at Thomas Infonatum. 8 Company. I am a salaryman. This is a local small-scale aid company that develops systems we occasionally have in that moment. I felt both invisible and exposed to deal with irrational expectations from the principal. Contractor, because we also take on subcontracting jobs, although we used to work extra until 10 p.m. 10 years ago, the work style improvements implemented recently have made it less unpleasant than it like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried was in the past. I work for Thomas Info in a certain capacity. Although I'm not heavily involved in the development process itself, it's a very significant function. I frequently work outside the office to complete my duties as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome result, as were times when I worked remotely from the workplace. After the former manager retired, a new manager was assigned to Thomas Info's development department one day. I was curious as to who would be selected, and it turned like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried out to be Mary Wilson. A stranger from outside the organization, it appeared like he was in his late 30s. "I'll be the development manager starting today, Wilson." "Mary, it's good to meet you. Try not to cause too much." I had smiled too long through invisible pain. Difficulty for me, even though I'm sure are all incompetent, when the staff heard this. Hot agreeing. They knew that someone unpleasant had arrived. I was concerned about how the development department would react to having someone of that caliber in that moment. I felt both invisible and exposed in charge. "Who is that person?" a woman whispered to me from nearby. "He is Nancy Smith, a woman in his 30s who works in the same development department as me." "Well, is he famous in the industry, or did as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome. He get the job through family connections, man. Manager Mary appears to be the president's niece. Based on what I later learned, he is the daughter of Thomas Info's president's sister." We nodded, assuming that his contacts helped his land. I had smiled too long through invisible pain, the job, although it was a somewhat last-minute appointment. These kinds of relationships are crucial in business management. With that in mind, I decided that Manager Mary's promotion was unavoidable. If this had been no issues, afterwards it would have. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed, benoped. But when Manager Mary took over, chaos broke out in the development department. As it happens, Mary knew very little about system development. As a result, this was confusion on the ground. due to his inconsistent and off-target in that moment. I felt both invisible and exposed directions. But Manager Mary, if we do it as you say, the system won't work. Silenced yourself? Are you implying that you are unable to obey my commands? To obey Manager Mary would be to put a stop to as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. Development process, however, he became furious. When I gave his advice naturally, his wrongdoings didn't end. This he attempted to work impulsively, however. If the task is abruptly increased, we won't be able to finish it. Why isn't this done? Because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true yet. But you just told us yesterday. So he takes his work very lightly. He arrives in the department just prior to the start time and promptly departs after causing havoc. He doesn't seem to care at all, like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried, the Saint's staff is having trouble keeping up with the additional work that he has caused. If this keeps happening, the project will fail and the staff's irritation will blow up. I talked to his since I was experiencing in that moment. I felt both invisible and exposed. This issue, Manager Mary, what I called out, and Manager Mary gave me a frustrated expression. He then looked down on me with a sneer. It's the ineffective man who rarely appears, which is who I was wondering who it. Like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried, are you blind to the problems the department is facing? Admittedly, I only visit the office roughly 3 times a week. But it's clear that Manager Mary is to blame for the misunderstanding in the development department in that moment. I felt both invisible and exposed, should be working more hours if things appear difficult for this than just informing of this. I swallowed my need to retaliate and gave my counsel in the most courteous way I could. Are you having any difficulties carrying out your managerial like a puzzle piece that never truly fit? No matter how hard I tried, responsibilities, I'm highs to help. If that's all right. How conceited I suppose I am, the manager. Nothing is beyond my understanding. Does he not see the urgency? Or does he not take ownership of the department's chaos, Manager? Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost Mary is unaware that if things keep on this way, the project will fail. Convinced that whispers would be ineffective. I chose to say it straight. I regret to inform you that a large number of staff members are not like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried. Happy with your current management, the project's advancement has also gone well behind schedule. How come Manager Mary's thickly makeup wrinkled up in annoyance? Despite feeling intimidated, I continued. It won't be long until the workers' resentment blows up as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. Project will fail, and the company's reputation will suffer. If this goes on, would you kindly consider our recommendations for the best course of action? The workers in our immediate vicinity listened carefully as I sincerely shared my recommendations. Because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, and the hopes that things would become better at work if only somewhat. They have to have anticipated a shift, but he was being so arrogant that he was not going to take my advice. Are you leaving some hostess? I had smiled too long through invisible pain clubs since you don't show up too. Often guys who are unpopular are very boring. That's not it at all. I scowled, perplexed as to why he was unable to comprehend. Instead, despite the fact that I barely visit like a puzzle piece that never truly fitted, no matter how hard I tried. Office roughly 3 times a week, I was being accused of not working on the other days. I labor outside with diligence. These are all things that only I am capable of doing despite having recently taken on because silence can be louder than hate role of manager. It appears that he is unaware of my outside activities. He should normally ask or review the documentation to find out. But he doesn't appear to be interested because he is the niece of the President As if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome, could understand that he became a manager overnight. But that's another issue if he intends to cause this much destruction to the development site. You are nothing at all. He laughed and added, I'm taking your pay, my salary. Yes, like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried. That is what I am expressing. I ought to collect the unemployed workers' salaries that makes it more meaningful. That's a bit too much. What is this? Something wrong with that. We should never pay workers who are not productive. Because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. I have to provide for my wife and kids. I can put up with his losing his mind at work, but not getting paid is another matter. Together since I graduated, I have been employed by this company, and I, as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome, have had nothing but kindness from the president. I wanted to stay, but I can't put up with a boss that is so oppressive that he is threatening to withhold my pay. I resign in such scenario. I'm grateful in that moment. I felt both invisible and exposed for everything you've done so far. Oh, so you're giving up. That's ideal since we were able to save the money we would have given you, manager. Mary grinned and giggled. I'm not terrified of his, now that I've made I had smiled too long through invisible pain. The decision to give up. Do I need to do a handover? Obviously not. This is nothing to turn over because you haven't been working on anything comprehensive. Farewell, the workers were yelling at each other as they watched my in that moment. I felt both invisible and exposed conversation with management, Mary. They must have concerned what my leaving would mean. For the project. Nevertheless, Manager Mary mentioned something improper for a manager, not knowing my position. I could no longer remain at this company in order to, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, safe, earn my family. I made the decision to step down and turned in my resignation. I told my wife about the circumstances as well. He agreed with my decision because he had heard me whine about Manager Mary, and as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, thought it was a huge problem. That I wasn't getting paid. I got it. Why don't you take a little break now that you have the opportunity? Retirement may be the following period in which you are unemployed, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. You are correct. The kids won't understand why I'm home all the time. If I don't tell them about my resignation, our finances are sufficient, but in order to provide for my family, I must start a new work, right? As if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome. Away, my phone kept ringing the next day. I looked at the caller ID and saw that it was the president. I was able to surmise what it was about, but as I had already tendered my resignation, I, like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried, saw no reason to respond and chose to ignore it, and Manager Mary called me as well later on. But it was he who essentially drove me away. What on earth could he want from me? That thinking kept me, because silence can be louder than hate from answering the calls. The calls from Manager Mary and the president continued for a few more days. But all of a sudden, Nancy called me. I had a good working relationship with perhaps Mary the manager, I had smiled too long. Through invisible pain, President asked his to convince me. Still, I chose to take the call, since I was curious about the circumstances. Hello? Nancy, how are you doing? Hello? How is business at the company doing? Are you genuinely curious? It's completely because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Disorganized. He grinned bitterly and replied, well, it's the president's and Manager Mary's fault for allowing his behavior. Nancy most likely UNDOD. Why I resigned, because he had witnessed me fighting with Manager Mary. You were doing far more. I had smiled too long through invisible pain. Significant work than programming. But Manager Mary was unaware that you were also the project manager. You are useless, he remarked. That's unbelievable. I oversaw the company's ongoing projects in my capacity as a project manager. Although I didn't spend, because silence can be louder than hate, a lot of time in the office, I managed important duties, including customer negotiations and progress reporting to make sure Product S got done on time. In addition, I negotiated the rights for the programs incorporated into the systems. Looked as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion for temporary help. When things were moving slowly and generally handled anything that couldn't be done internally after realizing you were the project manager. Mary tried to take over your work, but he has so little knowledge of system, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion development. That the clients are demanding a different person in charge that makes sense. The timetable is constantly being jumbled by manager. Mary's arbitrary work additions, we are not sure if we are fulfilling the needs of the client. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost, or if the development rights are safe. The accuracy of what we're doing is unknown. We're working so hard, but we have no idea why. Despite the mound of tasks, it is a bad dream. One might easily envision a manager. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed, Mary causing chaos in the development division. I'm sorry for the surviving staff members and customers. But Manager Mary is solely to blame. They ought to address their grievances with his. In addition, he began, shifting the responsibility of being, because silence can be louder than hate. The project manager onto other staff members after realizing he couldn't do it. However, how may project management responsibilities be managed by local staff? That's what Manager Mary usually does. I scowled and smiled bitterly. He shouts at people, and in that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed. Puts chores on them since he doesn't know how to work. It's a typical poor boss strategy president. Thomas finally called you because he could take it no longer. He is his niece, but he probably wasn't able to defend, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, his anymore. He must have been phoning a lot because he wanted you to return. Thomas Info's president is President Thomas. He was obviously quite desperate because of how often he called Mary. The manager also gave a call because silence can be louder than hate, was attempting to assign blame for the mayhem to you. Or President Thomas had instructed his to have you responded. No, I didn't. It's probably best that way. It would not be ideal for you to handle any irrational charges because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, as I had already quit and had been informed that there was no need for a handover. I am no longer in charge of the development department. Making contact with them could make matters more difficult then. I asked Nancy. I had smiled too long through invisible pain, a question I have been considering. Nancy, are you okay? Oh, I'm not at all right. You didn't hear anything offensive? He talked for a long time. But I was so tired of hearing it that I returned it. I had smiled too long through invisible pain to his. Nancy is a strong-willed woman, so even the male staff finds it difficult to oppose his. Apparently, he also had arguments with Manager Mary. It took place in the tumultuous development department this morning. Supervisor Mary chastised like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried. Nancy, don't act like it's none of your business. You worthless, take action without using a project manager. We are unable to proceed unless you establish a schedule. We work as employees, decide on your own course of action. Because silence can be louder than hate. Seize your pay if you're not even able to accomplish that. Nancy said, feel free. But if you do, I'll take my past up to the labor board at that manager. Mary struggled to find words he understood that getting in. That moment I felt both invisible and exposed. Reported to the labor board would be a major issue. Then Nancy was attempted to take on more job by manager. Mary, take care of this inquiry. I'm not responsible for this, and I have no idea how to. As if my presence always echoed in silence. Not in welcome, solve it, Nancy answered coolly, though believing it was outside the purview of his position, manager. Mary must have been irritated by Nanny's persistent obstinacy. You never stop complaining. Being an inept woman is difficult, isn't it? Stated Manager Mary, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. The other guys just decide to go ahead and do it, without hesitation. I don't think it looks that way. That's what we would call harassment, isn't it? Nancy shot back, a not-so-cute woman acting all high, and because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Mighty thinking more deeply, it was a waste of time to argue, manager. Mary said as he was leaving. Nancy succeeded in. chasing Manager Mary off. I grinned as I listened to his story, your strong rally being in A. I had smiled too long through invisible pain position to say that much. Actually, all I did was voice what had to be stated. It's uncommon for his to be allowed to voice his opinions. At this company, Manager, Mary was forced to concede for this reason, or as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome. You returning to the company? I'm thinking about it, really. It's difficult to let go. After almost 20 years of employment at this organization, starting when I was a recent graduate, I would feel more confident returning to Thomas Info. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost. If the working environment is restored, then looking for another's position. I would be delighted if you returned, so what's stopping you? It's Mary, the manager. It's clear that Manager Mary is the reason I don't want to go back, because silence can be louder than hate. He'll keep up his antics in the development division I had. No desire to tidy up his spills. Nancy then said something in a semi-satisfied tone. I believe he may really resign. Why do you feel that way? He as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. Is the niece of the president? He won't be released so lightly, in my opinion. Well, later on I heard something. President Thomas gave me another's call. I used to ignore the call since I didn't want to get into, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, any difficulty. But after learning certain details from Nancy, I chose to pick up and pay attention. I sincerely apologize. Well, I never thought my niece would act in such a horrible way. What is the company's present state, as if my presence always echoed in silence? Not in welcome of affairs, it's a total disarray. The clients are quite irate because the project isn't moving forward at all. The workers claim they are unable to continue working for such a corporation. President Thomas let out a long sigh. I had smiled. Too long, through invisible pain, making a valiant effort to reassure the staff members who are ready to turn in their resignation letters. This is pretty bad, and if it keeps up, our business will actually fail. Resignation letters must be accepted by the company. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed if they are presented. But if they take that action right now, the business will cease to exist. He's requesting that the staff hold off a little bit longer. It resembles trying to stop an impending dam breach after that. I had smiled too long through invisible pain. I had a question that had been on my mind, what initially drew Manager Mary to Thomas Info. Well, even among our relatives, we've always had problems with his really. I had never before heard that President Thomas had appointed, as if my presence always echoed in silence. Not in welcome his as a manager out of the blue, just because he was related to him. I had assumed that to be the case. But the situation didn't appear to fit. The sole daughter of my sister is Manager Mary, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Sister is a secretary at a logistics company, while he married Mary, the president, being the only daughter of the president. Mary was spoiled, and that's what happened. By no means was he putting up with Manager Mary's egotistical actions, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. I was a little relieved to know how he really felt. Even so, I was somewhat back to discover that Manager Mary was the president of a different company's daughter. His conceited attitude seemed more understandable after learning this. I had smiled too long through invisible pain, nonetheless, managed to graduate from college in spite of his laziness. He was unable to hold down a job, though, and has since changed employment 6 times. He made multiple attempts at dating, but was consistently dumped, even when as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. Relationships and career didn't go well. His pride kept us out of control. I had no idea he had such a convoluted past before coming to work at Thomas Info. Knowing this, I could see why President Thomas chose to. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost to point someone with his qualifications. I realized he had his troubles and started to feel a little sorry for him. Even though I had suffered because of he was initially meant to work for his parents' business. because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Grumbled that the logistics were too boring. I was forced to take his in since he insisted on working for a company that paid. Well, my aim was that it would serve as a springboard for his to engage with. Because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Society, though, he was his uncle and grudgingly granted his sisters and brothers-in-law's request. President Thomas undoubtedly didn't really want to appoint his as manager. He had to know what might happen if he promoted his to manager. But in as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, the hopes that would ease his transition into society. He recruited manager Mary. It would appear that he was unimpressed with President Thomas's kindness. But I was done with his. After this happened, my sister and brothers-in-law agreed that we, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, are no longer obligated to spoil his when I spoke with them. They made an effort to assist his in becoming self-sufficient, but manager Mary completely ignored them. He was full of pride and never felt guilty. This for he didn't. In that moment I felt both invisible and exposed. Have any appreciation for his family's support? I spoke with Nancy as well, and these are some unanswered questions. Could you please return, manager? Mary is going to be fired. Is it all right for me to return? Yes, in as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion fact. We are unable to restore order to this place. Without you, I apologize for the chaos. But now that you're back, maybe the workers who are considering quitting will think twice. Then, what about these prerequisites I gave President? In that moment I felt both invisible and exposed. Tom, a suggestion after pausing to consider it. He saw the value in it and agreed. It was agreed that I would return to work at Thomas Info manager Mary. Meanwhile, received word of his termination. I visited the presidents. I had smiled too long through invisible pain office to talk about this issue. Manager Mary was also called in at the same moment. Rathis, then brushing his off cold, he offered his an opportunity to speak. Perhaps in an attempt to get his to think things through, every glance was a verdict, and I always lost and find a different way to make apologies. This was President Thomas's final act of compassion. Manager Mary scowled as he saw me walk into the room. Why is he his? What language do you speak? Do you understand why? Like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried, this place has summoned you. Obviously, I'm being fired, which is ridiculous. Why, it's not at all ridiculous. It's obvious that you don't know how the development department is doing. Are you able to offer any defense remarks, Heise? Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost if he had taken responsibility for his mistakes. This could have been hope. But Manager Mary answered in a frantic manner, rather than expressing regret. Why am I being fired when I've done nothing wrong? It's because you didn't do. As if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome the handover properly. I wasn't going to give in his anymore, even if it appeared like he was only going to blame me. You claimed that I wasn't working and that a handover wasn't required, despite my promise must too. Because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, do it. The development department is currently in a terrible state. As a result, it aggravates me to think about it even today. You ought to have mentioned that you anticipated the current state of affairs without a handover, as if my presence always echoed in silence. Not in welcome are the one who is negligent. His you always place the blame else. Wise you are in charge of the Department of Development. You ought to have fully comprehended my effort. Why were you ignorant of this? Supervisor, Mary did not. I had smiled too long through invisible pain. Know what to say? He was unaware of the responsibility that came with being a manager. He most likely believed that he could simply boss for subordinates around and get paid a lot of money, relying on someone who has, because silence can be louder than hate. Quit is pitiful. Didn't you let me go because you could manage without me? Cease talking, you claim as much. Yet I have the right to sue you for damages. Due to your careless resignation, this mess was caused by, like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried, the project manager, who left without a handover. It should be you who accepts accountability. You threatened to seize my income, so I resigned. Isn't it excessive to expect me to assume ownership of the project while putting me in? I had smiled too long through invisible pain charge of charitable work, salary confiscation. What is it? I didn't say it at all, Mary. The manager abruptly became knave. He had threatened to seize my pay, of course. But it didn't seem right that he would acknowledge it, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion in front of President Thomas. Obviously, he had no power to set wages. President Thomas seems irritated by his actions. I presented his with a proof. Don't act as though you don't know. I have all of your careless comments. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed on tape. What? How do you mean my defense? You contradict yourself so frequently that it would be useless to debate who said what. Supervisor Mary never accepts accountability for his statements. I could never tell when I could be because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. False accused in a place like this. I discreetly recorded our chats on my phone in case I needed to establish my innocence. Supervisor Mary became Palais, a corporation that records conversations. Unbelievable. Normally I don't record discussions. I've never. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost. Felt the need to defend myself until after meeting you. I will play your statements right now. If you deny it, stop it. Manager Mary made a valiant attempt to halt me. He did not want President Thomas to hear. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost his haughty comments. There was only one thing he could do if he did not want the recording to play. So you admit that you said you would confiscate my salary and that a handover wasn't necessary, manager? Mary said I had smiled too long through invisible pain. I admit it, looking absolutely defeated and cornered. This was no turning back from his rejection now in light of this, I proclaimed. Manager Mary will be let go, and I will keep getting the pay you were meant to, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. Get until you retire. I've told the president that I'll repair the project you almost wrecked in exchange. What remain less shocked, it is reasonable to take your income since you haven't been working, manager. Mary could barely contain his, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, shock upon learning that I would be collecting his pay. He wouldn't have given a damn if all he wanted was for me to get paid more. It was frustrating, though, that I would be receiving the money intended for. I had smiled too long through invisible pain. His stop being absurd. Are you stealing from me? That is, it is not your right to refuse? You are no longer employed at Thomas Incorporated, he protested. But I wouldn't have been inspired to finish the assignment. He had like a puzzle piece that never truly fit no matter how hard I tried. Already completely botched without this arrangement, if it were my duty. That's one thing, but why should I have to repair the damage that Manager Mary caused? Of course, all I would lose out on is my initial pay, if because silence can be louder than hate. The idea failed, that's why I find the scenario to be really motivating. And this is something else I need to tell you. What is it now? It was terrible enough to be fired and have his money seized by someone as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. He detested what more is possible. Something about his expression, said Nancy, yes. Nancy came into the president's office at the summons of President Thomas. It seemed that he had been standing by in the corridor the entire time because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Hear you on something. Yes, something that meets your expectations. What is it? What topic are you discussing? Manager Mary became alarmed at seeing President Thomas wearing a severe expression and Nancy grinning. I was aware that President Thomas, and in that moment I felt both invisible and exposed. Nancy were looking into something pertaining to Manager Mary. Perhaps they had made a breakthrough. He was seen snatching a bank book by the surveillance camera around a week ago. Additionally, a 3,000 suspicious withdrawal has occurred. You can't talk because silence can be louder than hate your way out of this, manager. Mary, what Manager Mary made a sloppy attempt at stealing. But he had actually stolen business funds. He had greatly overestimated the circumstances. If he had believed he wouldn't be discovered, whatever. I had smiled too long through invisible pain. Sister said turned out to be accurate, what was said by my mothers. Something President Thomas said to the agitated manager. Mary appearing irritated, he added that you were using your parents' money to pay for hosts and purchase designer, as if my presence always echoed. In silence, not in welcome items that you could flaunt on social media, and you attempted to steal from our business instead of complying with their attempts to stop you. A lie. That is not what I did then. Why did you take our companies? Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost money without permission, manager. Mary recoiled at the harsh comments of President Thomas. Nancy applied furthest pressure after that, stealing cash to pay for hosts. I hate you as a fellow woman. Cease talking. How much do you know? No, in that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed. One has ever loved a lady like you who isn't even cute. How pathetic, Nancy remarked. You said that before, that I'm not cute, his veins clearly throbbing. Nancy reacted like an adult should have when he was labeled ugly. As if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion. But he must have been furious. On the inside, my spouse and kids are already his. I've heard your narrative, but I'm not interested in insults from a lady who has to pay a lot of money to hosts in like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried, order to receive any attention after being dumped by Guy's manager. Mary's face flued deep red at Nani's words. He was dumbfounded. He had failed as a worker and a woman as president. Thomas noticed. Manager Mary was in that moment I felt both invisible and exposed, loss for words he spoke. You've lost your job. We'll compile the proof and notify the authorities of your embezzlement police. That's not how far do you have to go. Long embezzlement is a grave offense. An offense he must. Every glance was a verdict. And I always have believed that obtaining his substantial sum of money would be simple and risk-free. It's possible that he was unaware that what he did was illegal, but he has to retrain his fundamentals. If he views society with such indifference, I had smiled too long through invisible pain. One cannot pill for another's money. You have to apologize if you make a mistake. He needs to start over from scratch. If he can't even grasp these basic concepts, he's over 40 years old, but he doesn't have common. As if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion sense. You have to change for the better by taking the appropriate penalty. When manager Mary realized how serious all of his transgressions had become, he broke down in tears. He was accused of embezzlement at work. Mary was taken in that moment. I felt both invisible and exposed into custody, and questioned it. Came to light throughout the investigation that he had also embezzled money from guys he had dated. He was accused of fraud, which made his charges more serious, given the seriousness of his several. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost offenses. He received a 7-year prison sentence. He argued in court that he wasn't at fault, but naturally it wasn't accepted legally. Speaking everything he had done was wrong. Maybe a 7-year sentence will make Mary reconsider how he views, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Society, he will probably be in his late 40s when he is liberated. Though he won't be able to start again easily at that age, his future appears gloomy, even if he manages to learn common sense today, as stated. I had smiled too long through invisible pain. I'm still employed at Thomas Info. I will get the salary Mary was scheduled to have till he retired. If I can bring the project back to life, this is an amazing promise, and it motivates me much to rework. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost the project when my wife learned that I had found new work and might even be receiving a sizable pay rise. He was happy. It seemed that our kids were unaware of my temporary resignation. I was a little nervous, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion about saying sorry to the clients. But I did apologize and gave them an update on our future plans. We succeeded in carrying on economic dealings with them. Mary was fired, and the development department got back to normal. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost weeks later. After we were able to extend the project's deadline, things started to move forward again. I'm happy to see you back. The project is safe as of right now. You're exaggerating, but I'll do my best. How much? As if my presence always echoed in silence. Not in welcome the president expects from me is evident in the contract he signed on my behalf. Making this initiative a success was my promise to live up to these expectations.